Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Outdoor Hospitality Weekly. I'm Alex Burkett, joined as always by Matt Whittemore, and today we've got another great guest interview coming up. We're talking with Jeremy Johnson, co-owner at Kona Hills Campground. They're right in the midst of an incredible development project, and we want to talk with him about where they are on this journey, understand his background and perspective on the industry, and just talk shop a little bit. So, Jeremy, thanks again for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Why
We're
don't you just
excited for this
start
one.
and give us just a quick background in your path so far to get from you have an interesting background in some previous businesses prior to coming into the campground space. So why don't you just start us off there?
Yeah, no problem. So, my background is primarily in technology and marketing, I would say. Right out of college, moved out to San Jose and got a job at kind of a startup in the mobile marketing space. Eventually landed a job at an agency up in Oregon, and back in 2000, call it like 2010, was kind of at the forefront of building mobile apps for people. So I went through that whole like rush of, everybody and their mom literally wanted to build a mobile app. Built, dozens of mobile apps for people, built lots of websites for people, and then kind of got burned out on it. Moved back to the Midwest and refocused my life in kind of two areas. One being cannabis, which was legal in Michigan at the time, and still is legal, more legal now. And then the other one, I continued with technology, but kind of pivoted into hardware, so RFID technology for conferences, music festivals, and things like that. So that's really where a lot of my background is professionally. But then I grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, very rural area. Worked at a camp for most of my younger years, spent as much time as I could outdoors. That's what I love. And so kind of through the cannabis industry, I got involved in real estate and went from multifamily, single family, commercial mixed use, eventually to short-term rentals. And now here we are at a campground.
Love it. Love it. That's an awesome path. So why a campground?
Yeah. So we had a kind of interesting trajectory and I've got two partners and we've been doing this together for over 10 years, at this point in the real estate side. And we had an interesting trajectory where our first purchase was, a multifamily house that we were living in and the landlord wanted to sell. We didn't know anything about real estate, but he wanted to sell it. And so he worked with us. He taught us how to buy real estate. We bought it on a land contract. What Midwest people call it a land contract. A lot of other people call it a seller's note. So we bought that and then, eventually bought our second thing, bought our third thing, and then got into commercial. And commercial is when we bought our first commercial building, it had a unit above it. And we turned that into an Airbnb. And that was kind of when things clicked. We live in a really beautiful place. We were like, okay, there's something here with the short-term rental side of things. And then COVID happened. And when we kind of had this plan to scale these individual units, but COVID happened and all of a sudden everybody wanted to get out of the city. So while that was great for our Airbnb business, and our rentals, it was really bad for us wanting to purchase anything more. We went from a 3-bed, 2-bath going for 150 to $170,000 locally to $250 to $300,000 like overnight.
Wow.
And that was hard for our business and our model, but it was harder for our local community. Like it was really hard to see like all of a sudden local people being priced out of homes. We don't have a ton of high paying jobs here. And so that kind of made us take a step back and be like, hey, we need to look at our business model because it's not working, but then we also need to think about like how our business model is affecting our local community. And that's when we found this 80 acres in the center of Marquette County. And we're like, hey, you know what? We could do something that positively impacts our community by providing a resource that's in demand without taking away from housing stock. And that's really kind of how the campground idea came to be.
Really cool. I love that.
And Jeremy, you touched on a little bit on how you found the location and the land for the property, but I think for so many folks that Matt and I come across on the development side as well, this is one of the main sort of hurdles that operators have to kind of come across, or somebody wants to develop a property is like, I know I want to build a campground, I know I want to build X, or I want to build Y, but what does that property look like? And how difficult was that process for you to actually go out to different parcels? I'm assuming walk them, trying to understand the concept you had in your mind of what you wanted to do with it and begin to kind of match the land to that.
Yeah. For us, it was kind of unique because we didn't, in our heads, we weren't thinking about a campground. You know, we had this moment in 2020 where we're like, we have to pivot, but we didn't know what it was too. And then one of my business partners and I think we were just driving out to his parents' house, on a weekend, and we came across a for sale sign. Um, and that's literally kind of how it happened. And, you know, we saw this little sign and we're like, I don't know, what's for sale? Like, is there a truck? Is there, what's over there? So we pulled over, we called the number, and, the guy that picked up was like, I think he thought we were a realtor actually when we called. It was a really goofy scenario. And he's like, oh, I've been waiting for you to call. Come over to my house right now. And we were like, okay. And he lived right around the corner from the property. And after that first meeting, he told us we could go walk it. And so we went and looked at it. And from the first time we walked it, we were like, this is a campground. The layout made sense. The location made sense. There was no doubt in our heads. So we didn't have that process of like, hey, we want to build a campground. Now we got to go look for the property. It's just kind of fell into our lap in a way. And then it also fell into, what we wanted to find something more centralized, more sustainable, and more scalable. And this met all of those things for us.
Super cool. What was the negotiation process like? What was it like to close that deal?
Lengthy. It was really interesting. The person who had owned it previously, older gentleman in our community, professor at the university, pretty involved. But he had been retired for a while. Very eccentric guy, and he originally wanted to put a subdivision on the property. And he wanted it to have an HOA. And for those of you who don't know the history of the Upper Peninsula, there's a lot of, in the Midwest in general, there's a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright inspired buildings around here. And one of Frank Lloyd Wright's disciples was John Lautner, who grew up in Marquette, Michigan. And we actually have like a local museum here full of Frank Lloyd Wright and John Lautner things. So he wanted to build this subdivision that was all Frank Lloyd Wright style. So very eccentric guy. And this is on top of a massive rock outcropping, by the way. Like no feasible way to get utilities up there. So it kind of gives you an idea of what that was like. But I think, this is January, February 2020. So for probably 6 months, every weekend, I would go over to his house, sit down with him, talk to him about his ideas. And he wanted a, rate for the property that was, far above market value. And then after about 6 months, I finally was like, hey, like I ran the math, I did the numbers, here's what we can pay for it. And surprisingly, he just said yes right away. So it took a long time, but I think the time building that relationship was worth it,
Nice. If you don't mind me asking, how'd you finance the purchase?
Yeah, so we've almost every real estate deal we've done has been unconventional with financing. And this one was no different. We worked out a seller's note initially. Banks, local regional banks aren't like super keen to lend on raw land.
Sure.
Especially when there's like no utilities, no like questionable access and all these things. So we worked out a deal, and it took us about a year to get it from a seller's note into a bank note. We had to find a local bank who was willing to not only finance a raw land deal, but also work with people who had revenue from the cannabis industry. So that was one of our biggest hurdles. But luckily, we found a really awesome regional bank or local bank that was licensed to work with cannabis people and was interested in a campground.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So Jeremy, kind of as we like zoom forward in the timeline here, you purchased the land, you were able to negotiate with the seller, you got the financing for it. We're now at the point where, you're making next steps on the property. Can you just talk about, kind of where you're at now and what the next steps are for Kona Hills?
Yeah. So right now, we have all of our entitlement and permitting done. Our special use permit has been approved by our local municipality. Our permit at the state level, Michigan is slightly unique, and not every state is like this, but Michigan licenses campgrounds at the state level. So we're permitted there as well. And we are taking reservations for 2025. Being that we're in the Upper Peninsula, we set our initial reservation period for June 1st because you never know what the weather's going to be like. But if the snow melts in April, maybe we'll open in May, So that's where we are now. And then the next steps is really, getting a first year of management under our belt and then looking at phase 2 and beyond of how we want to expand and improve the campground.
Amazing. So where can people make reservations at Kona Hills Campground?
Yeah, campkonahills.com.
Nice.
We're on HipCamp as well. Just got on TripAdvisor. I'm building out, the whole marketplace network right now. That's my January goal, is to make sure we're listed everywhere and easily findable.
Nice. And it's all primitive tent camping to start?
Yeah, phase 1 is all primitive tent camping, car camping if you want. And then, we're limiting ourselves due to the nature of our property to recreational vehicles under 24 feet long. So that's I always get the RV classes mixed up, but I think it's weird. It's like A and C are like can be under 24 feet, but then B is like 30 feet and above. I don't know why there's that like jump in distinction.
Yeah, it's confusing. So
Yeah,
Class A is like a motorhome, right? Class A is a motorhome.
Yeah.
Class C is like the classic, like
a nice little pop-up tent that's small and foldable sides that come out, and the thing that you see suburban families tow behind a Jeep or something like that, right? Exactly.
Yeah, 24 feet. It's pretty accommodating.
It's substantial. I mean, I have a 21-foot Toyota Sunraider, like the 1990s classic, personally.
I love that.
And like, yeah, that's all. I mean, we have my wife and 2 dogs, and that's all we need. But I
was going to say those pop-ups are the classic form of American camping. Probably what most people remember if their families ever went out. It was some beat up unit like that, no bathroom inside, everybody crammed in the unit, and go out and have a good time.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've got your first year of operations coming up, which is enough to fill your plate, I'm sure. But what else in terms of next steps for Kona Hills?
Yeah, really upgraded accommodations and amenities are the big one. We're opening first year with portable toilets. Not ideal. I would love to at least have vault toilets, but just this project has taken 5 years to get permitted and open. So obviously a lot in holding costs that have kind of taken away from development costs. But I think that like that's also allowed me a little bit more time to dream bigger. It's like, okay, originally we were thinking vault toilets. Matt, a conversation you and I had with another guy, it's like, oh, why aren't we thinking about septic? Why aren't we thinking about a slightly nicer experience? So, bathhouses are high on that list. and then permanent accommodations. Being that we are fully off grid, that presents its own challenges. But whether it's a tiny house or a cabin or glamping domes, that's really where we're at and starting to plan those things out.
Very cool. Very cool. So you alluded to quite a journey here with 5 years to get opened. What are some of those bigger challenges that you've faced along this journey?
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest ones and most unique ones, if anybody listening has done this or tried to do it, you'll understand immediately. But we have 80 acres across 3 different municipalities. And so it's a large property, number one, but number two, we're dealing with multiple jurisdictions, 3 sets of zoning rules, and all sorts of interesting things there. So that has been a hurdle. We actually, our entrance is in one municipality and then the campground is in another municipality. So that provided a lot of issues with access originally that it took a long time to work through. And then the third municipality, we actually cut out of the campground plan. So, we might include it later on, but for the sake of simplicity, we were just like, hey, let's push this one out for now. And then, again, maybe unique to Michigan. I'm not familiar with every state, but just like the communication with multiple agencies. Even EGLE is the state agency that licenses things in Michigan. And there were times when our local municipality was asking for approval from Eagle. EGLE, Eagle is what we call it in Michigan. And then the Eagle would be like, well, we need your local municipality to approve it first before we'll approve it. So just constantly having to go back and forth with all these different groups for permitting was quite the thing. And then I would say the third one, like access and, we, being in the Upper Peninsula, we, especially during COVID, post-COVID, we have a lot of attention on us from these bigger cities and tourists. And there's a lot of concerns from like the local community of like, hey, is this going to be something that actually benefits us or takes away from our local experience? And so education, messaging, working with the community to kind of get everybody at ease there was a big hurdle as well.
Makes a lot of sense.
And talk more about that factor of kind of overcoming the community obstacle. Where you guys are in the UP, I'm sure there are nice campgrounds and developments like the property you guys are trying to build, but there are also, like in many places around the country, some not so nice places. And I think it's one of those things that, when you're going through a development like this and working with that community, it's sort of a hurdle to have to overcome. And how was that convincing folks that the type of property that you were developing and ultimately the vision that you guys had for the location and what it was going to become?
Yeah. First off, it was a multi-year process. It was conversations with neighbors. It was public zoning meetings. It was really stressful. My wife stopped going to the meetings.
Understandable.
Yeah. She couldn't handle it. I think she went to like 1 or 2 and then was like, never again. So that was really difficult on me, my partners, our families. But it was, it was worth it. We grew up in this community. All 3 of us are from Marquette, went to high school here, grew up here. And the UP is really interesting because most of our economy for 100+ years has been based on mining and forestry. And so you have this kind of dichotomy where eventually you start to run out of natural resources. And then what does your economy revolve around at that point? And so for us locally, as younger people, it made sense to look at something more sustainable, but not everybody sees it that same way. And so there are a lot of people. At one point, we had a state representative in Marquette County who was against anything concerning tourism. She wanted nothing to do with it, but she was a very big proponent of mining and forestry, and so we had to kind of talk to people and be like, hey, look, like we see a different vision for Marquette. And, in the UP, the entire time I've been growing up since the 90s, I always heard this saying. People would say, we don't want to be the next Traverse City. And when they say that, what they mean is Traverse City is, yes, a beautiful place, but locals got priced out of the market there. And the congestion in Traverse City, this might sound crazy if you're living in Chicago or some other big LA or whatever, but the congestion in Traverse City during peak months in the summer is insane. Like a drive that would take you 15 minutes in off season takes you an hour peak season.
Wow.
And so for us, it was like, hey, we're trying to plan this smart. And if you just say no to developments, there's going to be people with money that find a way to get it through anyway. So why not take the time to do something that's like sustainable and isn't going to take away from the local experience? And in particular, like our property is undevelopable for like single family homes or a traditional commercial thing. So I think that was a big part in getting people comfortable with it. It's like a good example is a developer tried to put a hotel on the east side of Marquette about a year and a half ago, which is a very residential neighborhood, and that got voted down. And that didn't make sense because he's trying to do this in a residential neighborhood. We're not in a residential neighborhood. We're next to two hotels already. We're kind of out where it doesn't make sense to put homes. So I think it was really just laying those facts out for everybody and, eventually showing people this bigger vision. But it's been hard to communicate it for sure.
So appreciate that. And it's been quite a journey, as we've noted. What would you have done differently, if anything, over the last 5 years?
Oh man, I mean, there's so many things I could say I would do differently. I mean, like immediately, longer planning phase would have been great. Come into our zoning board with a more detailed plan. You can say you would have liked to do that, but the reality is there were so many unknowns. You just got to get started somewhere. And so I think like I could come up with a list, but I think that the way we did it was just how we had to do it because of the uniqueness of the property. And I think the only thing I would have really changed in actuality is starting smaller. Our original plan was to build 2 or 3 units on the property and scale up. But when I dug into the zoning rules of Sands Township, where we're located, they have a zoning ordinance that says anything over 2 short-term units is considered a campground and requires state permitting. And so when I saw that and read it, I was like, well, I could build 2 units, but then all of a sudden to build a third, I'm going to have to get a state permit. I might as well just get the state permit right now. Hindsight is 2020. I didn't realize it would take so long to get the state permit. So I wish we would have just built those 2 units and then figured it out from there. But I mean, there's very few things that I regret because it's all a learning process.
Sure. Love it. Yeah. And it's super impressive that, you've quarterbacked this really largely yourself, and figured it out. I know you have some construction experience in your background, but, nevertheless, really impressive, what you've put together. How many campsites is it going to be this season?
We're going to open with 39. We're permitted for 40, but one of them we've got to do some work on. And then the goal is to get up to 50 total. Yeah. And I on that note, I guess another one of the things I might have done differently is maybe get an engineer or something civil engineer on board earlier. But again, like we're in an area where there's limited resources. A lot of the engineering firms around here weren't even interested in the project, to be honest. Took a long time, and if I would have waited to find an engineer to sign on to the project, I don't think we'd be here. The project would have just died. Eventually, we found an engineer out of Grand Rapids who really helped pull everything together at the end of our permitting. But sometimes I think you just have to work with the resources you have, you know?
Well said.
And then Jeremy, as we, kind of wrap up here, talk to us about, what that future vision of the property is and how you kind of came up with that in the beginning and really what's going to differentiate Kona Hills from competitors, other properties, other sort of outdoor experiences in the area, just lay out over the next couple of years. How is that vision going to come to life?
Yeah, I think for myself and, my partners, I don't want to speak for them, but we all kind of feel the same way. Being that we grew up here, this is a piece of property, and it's hard to, if you've never visited Marquette or the UP, it's hard to envision it. But this is a piece of property in the center of Marquette County, at the edge of the city of Marquette, and it's a really incredibly unique property. We're 200 feet above Lake Superior, right across, the lake's right there. We're 200 feet above it. And there's even, there's a big rock outcropping that we sit on top of, and it's been private for decades, and the access has been cut off to it. And that was really mind blowing. It was weird. We didn't find this property until I was almost 30 years old. And in growing up here, I was like, how had I never been here before? It was so cool, so unique. And I had never been up there, and it was so central, and it was because access was blocked off. It was because it was private. And I'm used to things being Marquette and the UP in general is very good at public amenities. We have Sugarloaf, we have Hogsback Mountain, we have one of the largest mountain biking trail networks in the entire country with the NTN trails. And so that was like an odd concept to me that this amazing piece of land was blocked off. And that's really a big part of the larger vision, is opening up this incredibly unique piece of property to our local community. So that's, working with engineers to come up with safe access to the front outlook that looks over Lake Superior. That's working with our local trail networks to get everything connected. The NTN trail, for example, doesn't have a trailhead on US 41. It's off of 553, which is a county road. And so if we're able to be that trailhead on US 41, that opens up a lot more additional recreational opportunities. And then beyond that, there's all this land behind us, including publicly owned state land, that is inaccessible to the local community because they have no access to it. So with our campground, there's 160 acres just to the west of us that we'll open up access for immediately when we open this spring, that you couldn't get to previously because the only way to get to it was trespassing through privately owned land. So that, when I think about like bigger vision, it's not just like the sustainable tourism part, but it's like community building. Another really good example is on the north side of Marquette County, under the NTN North trails. You have companies like Longyear, who's a legacy. If you're not familiar with John Longyear, he's old money, legacy mining and forestry, and his company still operates in the UP today. Very influential figure in American history, though. Cool story if you ever want to look into it.
Nice.
But
yeah.
His company owns land in the north part of Marquette, and for a long time, a couple decades, they dedicated that land to public use and trails. But now that we are having a housing shortage in Marquette County, they're developing that land. They're building housing, and that's good, right? We need more housing, but that's taking away the land resource that made our community unique and special, and why a lot of people moved here. And so replacing that lost recreational land with new land is a big part of that bigger vision.
Love it. Yeah, you can't overstate how important access to outdoor recreation opportunities is, and to have it, connected directly to the campground.
Yeah,
So much value there.
totally.
And then, Jeremy, just as we wrap up here, remind folks again, where can people go to learn more about the campground? And if anybody wants to connect with you and talk with you about this process, if they're an owner or developer on a similar journey, where can folks find you at?
Yeah, I really enjoy talking to other people. About projects. I like helping other people. I like learning from other people. It's fun for me. So you can really easily find me, mostly on LinkedIn. Jeremy Johnson. There's a million of Jeremy Johnsons, but you'll find me. Cannabis and campgrounds. That's me.
Love it.
And then my email is just jeremy@campkonahills.com if email works for you. And then campkonahills.com is the website if you're looking to check out the project, book, or whatever.
Love it.
Awesome, Jeremy. Yeah, we're super excited to kind of see how the project takes shape and as the project continues to develop, what the property turns into. Because even as the guy from Ohio, you're in a super special location in Michigan and in an incredible area for folks to come visit. So yeah, we're looking forward to continuing the conversation and yeah.
Yeah. Do you know the Upper Peninsula used to be part of Ohio?
I did not know that. That's a
Wow.
interesting fact. Makes sense though.
Jeremy
That's like
Johnson,
that's like the most beautiful part of Michigan. So I'll claim it as Ohio territory.
The
Love it.
the War of 1812, Ohio. I think Michigan lost the war. My history is rough, but I think Michigan lost the war, quote unquote war.
But somehow got the territory.
Yeah, well, Ohio got the Toledo Strip. You got the port.
Right.
We got Toledo, and in exchange, Michigan got
Man,
the
we got a rough deal out of that.
Yeah. Look, hindsight is 2020. Looking back on it, Michigan won. But yeah, well, I appreciate you guys having me on. It was fun. I like talking about it.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate you joining us today.
You're a history buff. I would recommend putting a little museum or little board or plaque or bulletin board or something with some of these history nuggets. It's really cool.
Oh yeah. Placement. We didn't talk about it, but placemaking is a huge part of what we're looking to do. We've got the campground is actually named after the type of rock that it sits on, which is Kona dolomite, which you can own. Dolomite is very common across the world, but you can only find Kona dolomite in Marquette, Michigan.
Wow.
And we have some of the oldest fossils in the world called stromatolite fossils from where Lake Superior used to meet our property. The lake has receded quite a bit over thousands of years. But the history, geological, anthropological, or I'm not quite sure how to say that word, anthropological,
yeah,
something like that. That's a huge part of the education, the history, the placemaking is all part of what we want to bring to the community too.
Amazing.
Awesome. Thanks again, Jeremy. Really appreciate you taking some time and coming on. And look forward to getting updates as they happen over the next couple of years.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks.